On March 3, 2026, Donald Trump posted on his social media platform that Iran's air defense system, Air Force, Navy, and military leadership had been destroyed. He said Iran wanted negotiations, but the time for that had passed. 5 days into the war, the President of the United States declared that he had defeated Iran militarily. He was wrong. And the gap between that declaration and reality is the most important economic story of this entire war. Because behind every military conflict, there is one simple question that everyone asks except the politicians. How much does this cost? Who pays for it? And what, in the end, was actually bought? Today, we are going to break down why the most powerful and expensive military machine in human history cannot decisively solve the Iran problem, not because it lacks weapons, but because bombs do not work against the physics of mountain rock, institutional memory, and the mathematics of a war of attrition. This is not a story about Iranian strength. Iran is losing by almost every conventional military measure. This is a story about the difference between winning a battle and actually winning a war. Welcome to The Economic Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand where we are today, we have to go back to 2002, when an Iranian opposition group revealed a secret that changed the entire trajectory of the Middle East. Iran had been secretly building 2 nuclear facilities. That revelation launched 2 decades of negotiations, sanctions, sabotage, assassinations, and escalation, all aimed at one single objective: preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Every diplomatic agreement, every collapsed deal, every Israeli airstrike, every American threat across those 20 years was a consequence of that one obsession. But here is the thing that most people miss entirely. Iran built its nuclear program knowing that a military strike was inevitable, not hoping to avoid it, but treating it as a certainty that had to be engineered around. The entire architecture of the program was constructed around one principle: survivability. When you know your enemy has the most powerful air force in the world, you build deeper. You go underground. You go inside the mountain. The Fordow uranium enrichment facility sits approximately 80 to 90 meters inside a mountain. That depth was calculated by Iranian engineers based on the penetration capabilities of the most powerful American conventional munitions available. The facility was built below that threshold, inside solid rock rather than soil, because solid rock transmits explosive energy differently and is far harder to collapse. The Americans responded by developing GBU-57, the massive ordnance penetrator, the largest conventional bomb ever built. Iran responded by building deeper still. The Isfahan facility, where 60% of Iran's near-weapons grade enriched uranium is stored, is buried so far underground that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told senators in a classified briefing that the United States does not have the military capability to destroy it. Not that it would be difficult, the capability does not exist. 15 years and enormous resources were spent creating a bomb specifically designed to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities. In June 2025, it was used against Fordow and Natanz. Congress was later told it was not used against Isfahan because it would have been pointless. The facility was beyond reach. The preliminary intelligence assessment concluded that the strikes set the program back by several months. Not years. Months. Think about what that means. The most technically complex military operation in history, B-2 stealth bombers, a 36-hour round trip from Missouri, the most powerful conventional bomb ever created, targets studied for 15 years, and the result, by the assessment of America's own intelligence community, was a setback measured in months. This is the first reason the war cannot be won through bombs alone. The primary strategic objective of eliminating Iran's nuclear capability is unachievable. The most critical materials are located where no bomb can reach them. The second layer of this story is Iran's missile strategy, and it reveals how this country has been thinking about this war for decades. In the first 3 days of the conflict, Iran fired more than 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. Across the full course of the war, approximately 500. Every incoming missile required an interceptor missile in response. Without American assistance, Israel could have lost control of its airspace purely from the volume of strikes. But here is the critical detail that almost nobody discusses openly. An Iranian ballistic missile costs less to build than an Israeli interceptor costs to fire. Iran is producing ballistic missiles at a rate of approximately 100 per month. Interceptors are produced more slowly, cost significantly more, and require complex supply chain logistics. This is not a war fought with fire. It is a war fought with accounting. Iran is methodically exhausting Israeli defenses not by trying to win in any conventional sense, but by making the cost of defeating them financially unsustainable. The interceptor stockpiles diminish with every exchange. The mathematics of this situation does not look stable for Israel over any extended timeline. This is a war of attrition disguised as a missile war. The third layer is Iran's regional strategy, and this is where the most sophisticated move in the entire conflict becomes clear. Unable to defeat the United States or Israel in direct combat, Iran has chosen a different objective entirely. It wants to raise the price of this war for everyone on Earth until neutral parties apply enough pressure to force a ceasefire. Iran has struck all 6 member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The airports of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait were targeted. Drones struck a refinery operated by Saudi Aramco, halting production and igniting a fire. Qatar suspended energy exports following Iranian strikes. The result? Oil prices rose, flights were canceled, global markets went into convulsions, and economic damage began accumulating for countries that had nothing to do with starting this war. Think carefully about the logic of this move. Iran is not trying to defeat the United States. Iran is trying to make the rest of the world demand that the United States stop. This is geopolitics through economic damage. A strategy where the losing side inflicts enough pain on everyone around it that neutral players begin pressuring the winner to stand down. The question of how long Saudi Arabia, Europe, and global markets will tolerate this damage is a question with a running clock attached to it. But there is something both sides have quietly agreed upon that Iran is now threatening to break, and this agreement has been the invisible boundary of the entire conflict. Look carefully at what has not happened in this war. The United States struck Iran's nuclear facilities but not its oil infrastructure. Iran struck a Saudi Aramco refinery but carefully, without destroying it completely. Both sides have conspicuously avoided the one move that would genuinely collapse the global economy. Why? Because money matters more than blood at a certain level of power. Oil at $200 and collapsing global markets would not only be painful for Iran. It would be inflation in the United States. It would be recession in Europe. It would be stock market panic across every exchange on Earth. No political elite in Washington or Tehran is willing to accept that outcome. The Israeli stock market continued rising during the height of the war. American markets did not collapse. Dubai resumed commercial flights. Major capital did not flee because sophisticated investors understood that the unspoken agreement to preserve financial infrastructure would hold. And now, Iran is threatening to break that agreement. Iran's military leadership has declared that missiles are ready for a final strike on Israel's nuclear reactor at Dimona and on all energy infrastructure across the region. If the United States and Israel do not halt their attacks, the threat of what follows would be catastrophic. This is not primarily a military threat. It is an economic one. A strike on Dimona is not an attempt to win the war. It is an attempt to make the war so catastrophically expensive for the entire world that the pressure on the United States and Israel becomes unbearable. The only question is whether this is a bluff or not. If it is a bluff, Iran is doing what it has always done, loud rhetoric that fails to translate into decisive action. If it is not a bluff, we are watching the moment when the losing side decides to overturn the table entirely, raising the stakes to a level where nobody wins. That single question is what the world's financial markets are watching with such intense, nervous attention right now. Trump and Netanyahu targeted regime change in Iran. The killing of Khamenei was a decapitation strike against the supreme leader of 85 million people. Iran rapidly formed a governing council with no visible signs of surrender. And this reveals the fundamental strategic miscalculation at the heart of the entire operation. The Islamic Republic is not a personality cult. It is a system, a revolutionary bureaucracy, a theocratic state with decades of institutional roots permeated throughout by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Millions of people have tied their livelihoods and their identities to the survival of that system. Killing Khamenei does not destroy the system, for the same reason that killing a CEO does not destroy a corporation. The institution continues functioning. A new leader will be selected. The IRGC continues firing missiles. The system operates under bombardment because it was specifically designed to do exactly that. We have seen this pattern before in history. The United States dropped an enormous quantity of bombs on North Vietnam. North Vietnam did not break. The United States destroyed Saddam Hussein's army in 3 weeks, yet the strategic outcome was 20 years of chaos that actually strengthened Iran's regional position. Serbia, a small country with no strategic depth, held out under NATO bombing for 78 days. Iran covers 1.6 million square kilometers and has 85 million people. It is mountainous, with distributed infrastructure. A country can be bombed for years without being definitively defeated. The United States does not have unlimited patience, unlimited money, or unlimited political consensus to sustain this war. The conflict is being prosecuted without congressional authorization, by executive decision alone. Political support inside the United States is fractured. Rising gas prices, combat losses, Iranian missile strikes, and the ongoing economic costs are steadily eroding the political consensus that made the operation possible to begin with. Israel, meanwhile, is exhausted from simultaneous military operations in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and the previous round of confrontation with Iran. Haifa and Tel Aviv are under continuous bombardment. Hundreds of thousands of reservists are mobilized. The economy is under enormous strain. Interceptor stockpiles are depleting faster than they can be replenished. The question is not whether Israel can win the air campaign. Its air superiority is obvious. The question is whether that air superiority translates into achieving the actual strategic objectives before Israel's own economic and political resources run out. Now, let us convert everything we have discussed into specific numbers, because this is where it becomes unmistakably clear why this war cannot continue indefinitely. One Patriot interceptor missile costs between $3 and $4 million. One Israeli Arrow 3 interceptor costs approximately $6 million. One Iranian medium-range ballistic missile costs between $500,000 and $2 million to manufacture. In the first 3 days of the war, Iran fired more than 200 missiles. Just to intercept them, the United States and Israel spent between $600 million and $1,200 million. Iran spent between $100 million and $400 million to fire those same 200 missiles. The cost differential runs 3-to-1 in Iran's favor on every exchange. This is not military statistics. It is a financial ledger. One party to this conflict spends dramatically less on attack than the other spends on defense, and that imbalance compounds with every volley fired. Add to this the operational cost of the B-2 strike. Each combat sortie of a heavy stealth bomber costs approximately $130,000 per hour of flight. A 36-hour round trip from Missouri represents millions of dollars in fuel and maintenance costs alone, before the price of the munitions themselves. Each GBU-57 costs approximately $3 million per unit. The assessed result of this investment, according to America's own intelligence community, is a setback to Iran's nuclear program measured in months. This is one of the worst cost-to-outcome ratios in the history of expensive military operations, and the bill is still growing. While the United States spends hundreds of billions on a war in the Middle East, there is one player who has not fired a single shot and is winning. For years before this conflict, Iran was supplying oil to China in defiance of Western sanctions. Analysts estimate China was purchasing Iranian crude at a 30 to 40% discount to market price, obtaining cheap energy feedstock while Western competitors paid full market rates. Every year the sanctions regime operated was another year of Chinese competitive advantage in energy costs. That supply arrangement is now under pressure from the conflict. But China has already diversified its sources: Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, and its dependence on the Iranian Channel has already been reduced. China can afford to watch this conflict from the sidelines. While the United States expends political capital, military resources, and financial reserves in the Middle East, China is consolidating positions across Central Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Belt and road infrastructure projects continue. Trade agreements are being signed. Diplomatic relationships are being built with countries that are watching Washington's attention become completely consumed by this conflict. This is the classic strategy of indirect action. While your adversary becomes bogged down in a costly conflict, you occupy the space they cannot simultaneously control. The longer the war in the Middle East continues, the more China gains without firing a single shot or spending a single dollar on military operations. And this is the central geopolitical paradox of this entire war. The United States is spending enormous resources to impose order in one region, while simultaneously funding the strategic advancement of its primary global competitor. Every Patriot interceptor, every B-2 sortie, every month of oil price instability, every one of these is time and space that China is actively using. Step back for a moment and look at the complete picture. The United States can destroy almost everything in Iran that exists above ground. It can kill its leaders, destroy its air force, degrade its missile infrastructure, sink its navy. It is doing exactly that. But it cannot reach the uranium buried in mountains beyond the range of any existing conventional weapon. It cannot destroy the knowledge required to rebuild the nuclear program, because a military campaign can destroy infrastructure, but it cannot always destroy capability. It cannot force political capitulation from a country of 85 million people without a ground invasion for which there is no military capacity, no political will, and no international support. And it cannot sustain a campaign whose costs, in dollars, in interceptors, in oil prices, in political consensus, are compounding with every single day. Trump says the war will last 4 to 5 weeks. What happens in week 6? What happens in month 3 if Iran is still firing missiles from dispersed mobile launch platforms? The United States won every major engagement in Vietnam. It lost the war. It destroyed Saddam's army in 3 weeks. The strategic outcome was 20 years of chaos. It conducted one of the most technically impressive bombing operations in history against Iranian nuclear facilities. The uranium is still inside the mountain. The program, by the assessment of America's own intelligence, has been set back by months. Military victory and strategic victory are not the same thing. They never were. History has proven this again and again, and the economics of this war, its real costs, its real outcomes, and the real mathematics of attrition, confirm the same conclusion. The cruel irony at the heart of this story is this: the military operation launched to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear threat by destroying the diplomatic path that was closest to a breakthrough and by hardening Iranian nationalism in the face of foreign attack, may have made that outcome harder to prevent, not easier. If you want analysis that follows the money instead of the headlines, subscribe. Every subscriber matters.